Ethan stood on the edge of the alien planet's rocky surface, feeling the weight of the unknown all around him. Stars above seemed brighter here, but the air felt thicker, colder, more alive with danger. He had been sent here on a mission: gather information, make contact with the alien species, and find out what their intentions were regarding human expansion in this part of the galaxy. But nothing had gone according to plan. What should have been a simple negotiation turned into a tense standoff. The moment he had landed, Ethan had realized that the alien species, here the species known as the Zalorians, did not view humans as equals. They saw them as weak, inferior beings, barely worth noticing. It was a humiliating experience for the human soldiers sent to these planets. But Ethan had learned long ago not to care about what others thought of him. He had been trained to survive, and that was exactly what he intended to do. He could feel their eyes on him now, a group of Zalorian warriors standing just a few feet away. They had circled him, studying him as if he were some kind of strange animal. It made him uncomfortable, but he kept his head high. He had faced worse, much worse. One of the Zalorians, a woman, stepped forward. She was taller than him, her eyes glowing with a sharp, cold light. Her skin was a pale, almost translucent color, and her long silver hair cascaded down her back in a thick wave. She wore a tight, metallic armor that seemed to shine in the dim light of the alien planet's twin moons. She looked every bit the part of a warrior, and Ethan knew better than to underestimate her. Without saying a word, the woman raised her hand and gently touched Ethan's chest, just above his heart. He stiffened, but didn't flinch. She leaned in closer, her breath brushing against his skin. "I could kill you," she whispered in a voice that was soft, almost intimate but deadly. Ethan didn't react immediately. He had heard similar threats. Before, he had been in countless situations where his life was at risk, where enemies had warned him that he wouldn't survive the next move. But there was something about this moment that felt different: her tone, her cold certainty, the way her eyes never left his. Instead of backing down or showing fear, Ethan met her gaze. His expression remained calm, controlled, and steady. "You could," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "but you won't." For a moment, there was silence. The Zalorian woman stared at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were trying to understand him, trying to figure him out. She had expected him to flinch, to beg for his life, to show fear. But instead he had spoken without hesitation, without fear. It was as though he had already accepted the possibility of death. It was something she wasn't used to. The woman stepped back, still eyeing him with curiosity. The rest of the Zalorian warriors around them looked between each other, their expressions unreadable. Ethan could tell they were all waiting for her to make her next move, to decide what to do with him. He had no doubt that they could easily end his life if they wanted to. But there was something about this human, something that made her hesitate. She had never encountered a human like this before, one who faced death so easily, one who didn't cower or beg. Most of her kind believed humans were nothing more than weak, fragile creatures, incapable of surviving in the harsh realities of the galaxy. But this human, standing before her, was different. He was unbroken, unafraid. "I'm not afraid of you," Ethan added, his eyes not leaving hers. The woman stared at him, her thoughts racing. He could see the confusion on her face. She was trying to figure out why she hadn't gotten the reaction she was used to. But instead of the fear she had expected, she saw a strength, a quiet kind of resolve that was completely alien to her. "I've seen death many times," Ethan continued, his voice steady, "and I've faced it head on." "Me, then do it. But you won't find any satisfaction in it." Her eyes flickered with something like surprise, or perhaps frustration. She wasn't used to humans speaking with such confidence. In her world, the strong ruled and the weak bowed down. Humans were supposed to be weak, but Ethan wasn't bowing. He wasn't pleading for his life. Instead, he was standing there, calm, resolute, challenging her. And that was something that threw her off. The tension in the air was thick, as if the very stars above them were holding their breath. The other Zalorians had remained silent, watching intently, unsure of how to react. They could see that something had shifted, that something had changed in the way their leader was looking at this human. The woman narrowed her eyes, her voice now colder than before. "Why don't you fear death?" she asked, her tone demanding an answer. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because I know that facing it head-on is the only way to truly live." The words hung in the air for a moment, as if they were more than just a simple response to a question. They were a challenge, a statement of defiance that echoed through the night. Ethan's eyes never wavered, and for a moment, the woman found herself speechless. She had been prepared to kill him. She had expected him to crumble in fear, to beg for mercy. But here he was, standing before her, as if he had already won, as if he had already conquered the fear that so many others in the galaxy had fallen victim to. Slowly, she stepped back, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "You are different," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I have never met a human like you." Ethan didn't reply. He simply nodded, his eyes meeting hers once more. "I knew that this was far from over. The battle had just begun. The tension from their first encounter lingered in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Ethan could feel the weight of Zara's eyes on him as she stood at a distance, still trying to understand him. She had been trained to think of humans as weak, but there was something about this one, something different that kept her intrigued. For the next few days, Ethan found himself drawn into the world of the Zalorians, though he never forgot why he was there. He had a mission: gather information, and if possible, make contact with the Zalorian leaders to ensure they didn't pose a threat to humanity's expansion. Yet, despite his training and focus, the Zalorians' way of life was fascinating. Their culture, their technology, and their view of the universe were all so far beyond what humanity had achieved. Ethan's role here had initially been that of an outsider, someone who was only tolerated because of his mission. It changed when Zara began to watch him. He noticed it the second time they crossed paths in the sprawling, stone courtyard of the Zalorian stronghold. She wasn't alone this time. Other Zalorian warriors surrounded her, but her eyes stayed locked on Ethan as he passed. His footsteps were steady, but inside he was unsure. His previous encounter with her had left him rattled in a way he hadn't expected. Zara wasn't just a warrior. She was a force to be reckoned with. This time when Zara spoke, her voice was softer, almost curious. "You've been here for a while," she said, keeping a slight distance. "What do you want from us, human?" Ethan looked at her, sensing the shift in her tone. She wasn't threatening him this time. She was asking. "I want what's best for both of our people," he replied carefully. "Humans are expanding, and I'm here to make sure no one gets hurt." Zara raised an eyebrow. "And you think we'll just let you take what's ours?" "No," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I think we'll learn to work together." Stared at him for a moment, processing his words. "You really believe that?" "I do," Ethan said, meeting her gaze. "I've seen it before. There are always differences between species, but that doesn't mean we can't find common ground." Zara didn't respond right away. Instead, she tilted her head, sizing him up. He wasn't like the other humans she had encountered. Most of them came across as fearful or overly eager to please. But this human Ethan wasn't trying to prove himself. He was simply stating the truth, at least what he believed to be. "The truth? I'll believe it when I see it," Zara finally said. Her voice still guarded but not as harsh as before. Over the next few days, their interactions became more frequent. Ethan had been assigned to observe Zalorian military exercises, and Zara was often the one in charge of overseeing them. At first, she had kept her distance, watching him with suspicion. But as time passed, she couldn't help but notice how different Ethan was from the other humans she had encountered. There was a quiet strength in him, something that spoke volumes without needing to be said. While the other humans cowered or hesitated, Ethan moved with purpose, asking questions, learning quickly, and adapting to the Zalorian ways of combat. He had always been a fast learner, and the Zalorian combat techniques were no exception. 2. Zara's surprise. He showed a natural skill for their form of fighting. One afternoon, during a training session, she asked him to spar with one of her top warriors, a towering figure named Zarek. Zara had watched many humans fight before, None had ever come close to standing their ground against the Zalorian warriors. Ethan, however, wasn't intimidated. He stepped into the sparring circle, his eyes steady, his body poised, ready. Zara asked, her voice carrying a tone of curiosity now, more than anything else. Ethan nodded, not saying a word. Zarek moved first, lunging at him with the speed of a predator. Ethan, however, was fast. His body moved with a fluid grace that Zara hadn't expected. The first strike from Zarek missed entirely. Ethan dodged, his movements almost too quick to follow. For a split second, Zara saw something. In his eyes, this wasn't a man who feared the outcome. This was a man who welcomed the challenge. The fight continued, and to Zara's surprise, Ethan held his own. Zarek was strong, but Ethan's ability to read his opponent's moves, to anticipate what would come next, gave him the edge. Long before Zarek's frustration started to show, he had underestimated this human, and now, in the heat of the sparring session, he was getting outmaneuvered. Finally, Ethan landed a clean blow. Zarek stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. The fight ended there, but the damage had been done not to Zarek, but to the way Zara saw Ethan. She had always thought of humans as weak, as fragile creatures, but here was a human who had stood his ground against one of her best fighters. Ethan hadn't just survived, he had thrived. And it made Zara question everything she had believed about the humans. As the crowd of Zalorian soldiers began to disperse, Zara walked up to Ethan. "That was unexpected," she said, her voice more thoughtful than before. Ethan smiled slightly. "You didn't think I'd be able to handle myself?" "Didn't think anyone could," Zara replied, a hint of respect creeping into her voice. "But you're not like the others." Ethan paused, considering her words. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, her tone growing serious, "that I'm starting to wonder if maybe you're right. Maybe humans do have something worth fighting for." Zara turned and walked away, but Ethan remained still, watching her. Something had shifted between them, a change he couldn't quite explain, but one that he felt deep inside. Zara was starting to see him differently, not as a threat, but as something more, and for the first time, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at peace. The days passed quickly on the Zalorian planet. Ethan found himself growing more accustomed to their way of life, though he never let his guard down. He was still a human in a land of powerful alien warriors, and that made him a target. Zara's presence had become a constant, and strangely, it was no longer threatening. She was different now, her cold exterior slowly giving way to something more complicated. Ethan noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior. Where she once looked at him with suspicion, she now watched him with curiosity. Sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, he would catch her glancing at him from across the training grounds. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It wasn't just about survival. There was a deeper understanding between them, something that made Ethan feel like maybe they weren't so different after all. One evening, after another long day of training, Ethan and Zara found themselves walking side by side toward the edge of the stronghold. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow across the vast alien landscape. The quiet hum of the Zalorian technology seemed distant now. It's almost drowned out by the stillness of the evening. Zara was unusually quiet, her arms crossed as she looked out over the horizon. Ethan, sensing the change in her mood, decided to break the silence. "You don't have to keep watching me," Ethan said, his voice light but with a hint of humor. "I'm not going anywhere." Zara didn't respond at first, but then she sighed, a sound so rare from her that it caught Ethan's attention. "I was just thinking," she began slowly, "about everything you've said, about humans, about peace." She turned to face him, her piercing eyes locking with his. "I've heard stories, we all have, about how humans are weak, selfish, and always fighting among themselves. It's hard to believe any of that could change." Ethan met her gaze and gave her a slight smile. "I get it. That's what everyone believes about us. We're the underdogs, always fighting for survival, always struggling. But that's what makes us strong." Zara raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You think your strength comes from being weak?" "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "It comes from never giving up, from fighting for what we believe in. no matter the odds. He paused for a moment, his smile fading slightly. Maybe we're not so different after all. I've seen warriors who think they're strong because they never show weakness, never show fear. But strength isn't about showing no fear. It's about being afraid and pushing forward anyway. Zara stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time, Ethan saw something in her eyes, something that resembled doubt. He wasn't sure what it meant, but it made him wonder just how much of the Zalorian way of life she had truly accepted. I never thought about it like that, she said softly, her voice almost lost in the evening air. Ethan nodded. Sometimes. It's the simplest things that change everything. They stood there for a while longer, looking out at the horizon. The night was settling in, and the stars began to fill the sky. Despite the chaos of their worlds colliding, this moment felt peaceful. And for a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to forget that he was a stranger on a hostile planet. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something more, something that Zara might be starting to see. The next day, a sudden disturbance shattered the quiet peace that had begun to form between them. A warning alarm blared across the stronghold, and within minutes, the Zalorian warriors were mobilizing, their swift movements echoing through the corridors. Zara was among them, leading the charge with her usual intensity. Ethan was quick to follow, his instincts telling him that whatever was coming would be a challenge. As they reached the outer walls of the stronghold, Ethan saw the cause of the alarm: an enemy fleet of ships descending from the sky, their dark shapes blocking out the stars. It wasn't just any enemy force. It was the Ravkor, a ruthless alien race that had been causing problems for the Zalorians for years. Their ships were powerful, their soldiers brutal, and they had one goal to conquer. Get ready, Zara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The warriors around her began to prepare their weapons, and Ethan followed suit, grabbing the nearest gun. The sense of urgency was palpable, and he could see the fear in the eyes of some of the Zalorians. Despite their brave front, Zara turned to him, her expression hardening. Stay close to me. Don't wander off. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. Got it. The Ravkor fleet landed with an earth-shattering thud, and the battle began. The Zalorian warriors were fierce, but the Ravkor were even fiercer. Their weapons were more advanced, their soldiers better trained. But Ethan wasn't just a soldier. He was a human soldier, and that gave him a different kind of edge. He fought with everything he had, moving with precision and strength that surprised even the ex-Lorans. As the battle raged on, Ethan found himself next to Zara, fighting side by side. He could see the determination in her eyes, the way she moved with deadly grace. But there was something more in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. Something that made Ethan wonder if their growing bond was more than just survival. In the midst of the chaos, Zara glanced at Ethan, her expression fierce, but something else, something softer. You fight better than most of my warriors, she said between breaths. How? Ethan didn't answer right away. Was too focused on the battle. But as he took down another enemy soldier, he looked back at her, grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Maybe it's because I don't care about dying, he said. I just care about making sure you don't die. Zara froze for a moment, her eyes locking with his. There was something in that simple declaration that made her pause a softness, an honesty that she wasn't used to seeing in warriors like Ethan. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for her, for their survival. They fought, side by side, for what felt like hours, neither one willing to back down. As the last of the Ravkor soldiers were driven back, the battlefield was silent except for the heavy breathing of the exhausted warriors. Ethan stood beside Zara, both of them covered in sweat and dirt, but alive. You were right, Zara said quietly, her voice almost lost in the aftermath of the battle. Humans are stronger than we thought. Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. We don't give up. Not now. Not ever. And in that moment, for the first time, Zara understood. She wasn't just seeing a human, she was seeing someone who was willing to fight for something more than survival. Someone who would fight for peace. The battle was over, but the aftermath was far from peaceful. The Ravkor fleet had been driven back, but the cost of the victory was high. The Zalorian stronghold was heavily damaged, and many warriors had been injured, some fatally. The once proud and secure walls now stood in ruins. A reminder of the fierce power of the enemy they had faced, Ethan moved through the battlefield with Zara by his side, both of them surveying the damage. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, and the sounds of groaning metal and distant fires filled the silence. Despite the chaos, Ethan remained calm, his military training kicking in as he helped the injured and directed some of the Zalorians. To safety, Zara, though visibly exhausted, was focused. Her fierce determination never wavered. She checked on her warriors, offering a word of encouragement or a stern command, depending on what the situation called for. Ethan could see the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This wasn't just a battle she had fought. It was her people's survival. He watched as she approached one of the injured warriors, a young Zalorian named Lyra, who was sitting against the broken wall, clutching her side. Zara knelt beside her, speaking in quiet tones. Ethan couldn't hear what she was saying, but it didn't matter. The bond between them was clear. This wasn't just leadership, this was personal. Ethan turned away and continued to help where he could. The battle had been hard, but it had also proven something to him, something about Zara, about the Zalorians, and about himself. He had always seen himself as an outsider, a human among alien beings, but now, in this moment of chaos, he felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a soldier. He was part of something larger. It wasn't long before the high-ranking Zalorian leaders arrived, their towering figures a stark contrast to the others. They had survived the battle, but barely. Their eyes were cold, calculating. They had no time for words of thanks or praise. All that mattered was what came next. Zara stood as they approached, her expression hardening once again. She was a warrior, a leader, and in this moment, she had to be both. Ethan could see the shift in her demeanor. The Zara he had seen during the battle was someone he could trust, someone who had fought beside him. But the Zara standing before the leaders was different, more distant, more guarded. One of the leaders, Draxer, a hulking figure with black scales and glowing eyes, spoke first. His voice was low, grating, and full of authority. "You have proven yourself human, Draxer," said, his eyes briefly flicking over to Ethan. "But your actions today have cost us. Many warriors are dead. We will not forget that." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. He didn't say anything. He knew better than to challenge the leader of a warrior species. Instead, he let Zara respond. "We did what we had to do," Zara said firmly, "and we're still standing. That's what matters." Draxer's gaze flicked to her, his eyes narrowing. "What matters is our survival. And now, we must prepare for what comes next." There was a pause, and for a moment, it felt like Zara and Draxer were engaged in some kind of silent struggle. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. It was clear that while Zara had proven herself in battle, her position as a leader was still being questioned by some of her own people. Ethan took a small step forward, his presence breaking the silence. "What's next?" he asked, his voice calm but insistent. Draxer turned his cold gaze to him. "We rebuild. We prepare for the next battle. The Ravkor will return." Zara nodded, and we'll be ready for them. But Ethan could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't sure that just rebuilding would be enough. There was something deeper troubling her. Something that wasn't so easily solved with weapons and armor. Later that night, after the leaders had left to discuss their next move, Zara found Ethan sitting alone near the edge of the stronghold. The moonlight bathed the landscape in a soft glow, casting long shadows over the wreckage. Ethan was staring out into the distance, lost in thought. Zara approached him slowly, her steps quiet, almost hesitant. She'd become used to his steady presence, and it was comforting to know that despite everything he hadn't turned away. When she reached him, she stopped and simply stood there for a moment. "Watching him, you're thinking about the Ravkor, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan didn't look at her right away. Yeah, he replied. They're going to come back, we both know that. Zara nodded. They'll come back stronger. We'll have to fight harder. I don't think fighting harder is the answer, Ethan said quietly. Not this time. Zara raised an eyebrow, turning her full attention to him. What do you mean? Ethan finally turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. We're too focused on just surviving. We're fighting to win the next battle, but what happens after that? What happens when we've killed enough to protect ourselves, but there's no one left to fight for? Zara was silent for a moment, considering. His words? Ethan could see the wheels turning in her mind. She'd always been about fighting for her people, fighting for victory. But what if fighting wasn't the answer anymore? We've been surviving for so long, Ethan continued, his voice almost a whisper. Maybe it's time we start living. Zara stepped closer, her eyes searching his face for some hint of doubt. But there was none. Ethan was serious. For the first time, she began to see what he meant. If we keep fighting the same way, she said, her voice quieter now, we'll never change. We'll always be at war. Ethan nodded. Exactly. There was a long pause before Zara spoke. Again, I don't know if my people are ready for that kind of change. You don't have to convince everyone all at once, Ethan said, his voice gentle. Just one step at a time. Above them, finally, she sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of change either. Ethan smiled, a small, understanding smile. Then we'll take it slow, together. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the world was still pressing down on them, but in that brief silence, a sense of peace settled between them. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a solution. It was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Zara didn't feel so alone in the fight. The days following the battle with the Ravkor fleet were full of tension. The Zalorians had suffered heavy losses, and even though they had driven the enemy away, their victory felt hollow. Zara knew that the Ravkor wouldn't stop, they would regroup and return, and the Zalorians would have to face them again. But the idea of just fighting for survival was starting to feel like a never-ending cycle. It's one that would never end unless something changed. Ethan had spent the last few days helping with the rebuilding efforts, offering his skills wherever he could. He had always been a soldier, but now, as he worked alongside the Zalorians, he began to realize that there was more to this than just fighting. He had started to see something in Zara that he hadn't seen before, a desire for change, a hunger for something beyond the endless battles. One afternoon, as they worked together to rebuild a wall that had been destroyed in the attack, Zara spoke up. We can't keep doing this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is all we've ever known, fighting, surviving, but it's not enough anymore. Ethan looked at her, wiping the sweat from his brow. I know, he said. It's not just about survival anymore. We need something more, something we can build. Zara nodded, her eyes fixed on the half-built wall in front of her. I want more, she said, her voice steady, but filled with uncertainty. But I don't know how to make it happen. My people have been fighting for so long. They don't. Know anything else? Oh. Ethan put down the tool he was holding and walked over to her. He could see the frustration in her eyes, the same frustration he had felt many times before. He had been in situations where it felt like the world was too big, too complicated, and there was no way to make a real difference. But he had always believed that if you just kept trying, kept pushing forward, change was possible. Maybe you don't have to do it alone, Ethan said. You've got people here who are willing to listen. And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for something different. Zara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for a moment, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling, especially for someone who had spent her life in a world of war and survival, but it was there. She couldn't deny it. I don't know if I can change everything, she said softly, but I have to try. Ethan nodded. You don't have to change everything at once. Take it one step at a time. Act! Start with what you can do right here, right now. Change can start with just one person, and that person could be you. Zara was quiet for a moment, and then she let out a breath. I'll try, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The next few days were filled with quiet conversations and small actions that seemed insignificant at first. But to Zara, they were the beginning of something new. She started to speak to her people differently, focusing not just on survival, but on what they could build together. She began to teach her warriors that strength wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about building something worth protecting, something that would last beyond the next battle. At first, the change was slow. Some of the warriors didn't understand, and many were skeptical. They had been taught that strength was in fighting, and that their survival depended on their ability to defeat anyone who threatened them. Zara knew that changing these deeply held beliefs wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it had to start somewhere. Ethan stood by her side through it all. It wasn't just a human ally. He was a partner in this journey, someone who believed in the same vision for the future. His presence was a reminder to Zara that change was possible, even in a world so entrenched in war. One evening, after a long day of working with the warriors, Zara and Ethan sat together in the courtyard of the stronghold. The sky was dark, and the stars shone brightly above them. The air was cool, and for the first time in a long time, it felt peaceful. "I think it's working," Zara said quietly, her gaze fixed on the stars. Some of the warriors are starting to listen. They're starting to see that there's more to life than just fighting. Ethan smiled. "I knew you had it in you. You just needed to believe that change was possible." Zara looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," she admitted. "But I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, it's worth the risk." Ethan turned to face her. "You don't have to do it alone. We'll do it together." For a moment there was silence between them, a comfortable silence that spoke volumes. Both understood what was at stake. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be setbacks. But they had already taken the first step, and that was enough for now. The following week, the Ravkar returned, just as Ethan had predicted. The alarm sounded across the stronghold, and the warriors sprang into action. But this time, there was something different in the air. Zara stood at the front, her eyes filled with determination, but also with something else: hope. The warriors looked to her, and they saw not just a leader, but someone who believed in a future beyond war. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting on his weapon, ready to fight if needed. But this time he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something more, for the chance to build something that could outlast the battles, for the chance to make the galaxy a place where peace was possible. The Ravkar arrived. With their usual ferocity, their ships descending from the sky like predators. But as the battle began, something strange happened. The Zalarian warriors, though outnumbered, fought with a new energy. They fought not just to protect themselves, but to protect the future Zara was beginning to build. Their strikes were more coordinated, their movements more precise. They fought with purpose, and that made all the difference. Zara led the charge, her voice commanding, her warriors following her lead. Ethan fought beside her, his presence reassuring, a reminder that they were in this together. The battle was long and hard, but in the end, the Ravkor were pushed back. The Zalorians had won, but this victory felt different from the others. It wasn't just a win in a battle, it was a win for the future. As the dust settled and the last of the Ravkor forces retreated, Zara stood among her warriors, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. They had fought together, and they had won together. And for the first time, she could see the possibility of a future where peace was more than just a dream. Ethan walked over to her, his eyes meeting hers with a knowing smile. "You did it," he said softly. "You showed them that there's more to life than just fighting." Zara smiled back, her heart swelling with hope. "We did it, together." And for the first time, she felt like they were on the right path, one step closer, to a future where survival wasn't the only thing that mattered. The days after the battle with the Ravkor were filled with a quiet kind of relief. The Zalorian warriors were tired, but they had proven something to themselves that day. They were capable of more than just fighting to survive. They could fight for something greater, something that could last beyond the next battle. Zara, as their leader, had shown them the way. Ethan stood beside her as they looked out over the stronghold, now slowly beginning to rebuild. There was still much work. to be done, but for the first time, there was hope. Hope that they could create something different, something better. I didn't think we could do it, Zara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think my people would be ready for this kind of change. Ethan glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth.
Oh, you did it.
You gave them something to believe in. Zara shook her head, looking out over the horizon. I didn't do it alone. You'll help me see that peace is possible, that maybe we don't have to keep fighting. I only helped you realize what you already knew deep down, Ethan said. You've always had it in you. You just needed to see it for yourself. Zara didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. You really believe that we can change, don't you? She asked. Ethan nodded. I do. I've seen it happen before. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you want it, you can make it happen. Zara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face. There was something in them now, something that hadn't been there before. It was a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, the future could be different. I never thought it was possible, she said, her voice softer now, but with you, I think we can make it work. Ethan smiled, his heart light. Then let's get started. The next few weeks were filled with hard work. The Zalorians, under Zara's guidance, began to focus on rebuilding not just their stronghold, but their way of life. They started teaching their warriors new skills, skills that weren't just about fighting, but about working together, about creating, and about protecting something bigger than themselves. Zara worked tirelessly, not just as a leader, but as a teacher. She taught her warriors to think beyond survival, to see the value in cooperation, in understanding, and in peace. Some of the older warriors resisted, but slowly, the younger ones began to see the change. They saw that Zara's vision wasn't just about ending wars. It was about creating a future where the Zalorians could live in peace, without the constant threat of battle. Ethan continued to support Zara, offering advice when needed, and helping the warriors adjust to the new way of thinking. His experience in human diplomacy was a valuable asset. Even though the Zalorians were still a bit hesitant to trust him completely, but Zara believed in him, and that was enough to make others start listening. One evening, after a long day of training and rebuilding, Zara and Ethan sat together near the edge of the stronghold, overlooking the land. The sun had set, and the stars were starting to twinkle in the sky. Do you ever wonder if this is all worth it? Zara asked, her voice low, almost as if she were asking herself more than Ethan. Ethan looked over at her, seeing the weariness in her eyes. It had been a long road, and while things were improving, there was still so much work to be done. The pressure of leadership weighed heavily on her. But she wasn't backing down. Every day, he said with a slight chuckle. But then, I remind myself that it's not about the big picture. It's about the small steps. It's about what we're doing right now. Zara turned to him, her gaze thoughtful. And what are we doing right now? We're building something, Ethan said simply. It's not easy, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we're building a foundation for a future where fighting isn't the only option. Zara smiled slightly, her eyes softening. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is worth it. They sat in silence for a moment. The only sound, the gentle wind rustling through the trees. For the first time in a long while, Zara felt a sense of peace. It was fleeting, but it was there. They weren't out of the woods yet, and there would still be challenges ahead, but they had taken the first step. They had shown that peace was possible, even in a world so divided by war. A few days later, a messenger arrived at the stronghold with troubling news. A new threat had emerged, a rival faction of the Rav Corps even more dangerous than the first. This new group had formed an alliance with other alien species, and they were planning an attack on the Zalorians' homeworld. Zara immediately gathered her leaders, and Ethan was called in to help strategize. It was a hard blow. They had just begun to rebuild, to form the bonds that would help them achieve peace. And now they were faced with another fight. As the leaders sat around the war table, discussing their options, Zara's mind raced. The old instincts of a warrior were still there, sharp and clear. She knew how to fight, how to lead her people to victory. But this time, she was different. This time, she wasn't just thinking about winning the battle. She was thinking about the cost of victory. "We can't keep doing this," she said. Quietly, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "Can't keep fighting forever." Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady. "Then what do we do?" Zara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face. For a long moment, there was silence. The future of her people, the future of the galaxy, rested on this decision. She had to make the right choice, not just for her people, but for the future. She was trying to build. "We don't fight for survival anymore," she said finally, her voice firm. "We fight for peace." The decision was made. Instead of preparing for a traditional battle, Zara and Ethan decided to reach out to the other factions, to try and negotiate, to find common ground. They knew the risks, but they also knew that this was their best chance at building a lasting peace. The next few days were a blur of diplomatic talks, tense negotiations, and careful planning. It wasn't easy. There were still many who doubted the possibility of peace. But with each step, with each new ally gained, Zara felt herself growing more confident in her vision for the future, and as the first signs of peace began to take root, she knew that the journey wasn't over. There would be more battles ahead, both external and internal. But for the first time, she was ready to face them not just as a warrior, but as a leader who believed in the possibility of something better. Ethan stood by her side, unwavering. Together, they had started something that would change the course of history, and for the first time, Zara believed it could work.